On Gaza, this time from David Cameron, who has said that the UK has delivered 100 tons of aid into Gaza by air. He said he thanks our Jordanian partners for their support in the operation. More aid has been getting into Gaza, he says, but we want to see 500 trucks entering each day and more crossings open. That's David Cameron on the aid situation in Gaza. Well, earlier, Israel said it planned to proceed with its military operation in the city of Rafah in Gaza. That's despite President Biden warning that the United States will withhold the supply of offensive weapons if Israel launches an all-out assault on the city. Well, joining us now is Laura Blumenfeld, a former senior policy advisor to the US State Department's Israel-Palestinian negotiating team. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and on quite an interesting evening, because the Israelis saying quite clearly that the Cairo talks are over for now. The Rafah operation is to proceed as planned. I mean, where do you think this leaves the Americans and President Biden?
Well, I mean, what we're watching is a very public and ugly Foxhole fight. We started off after October 7th. They were Foxhole buddies. You saw that, that hug on the tarmac, President Biden, Netanyahu basically fell on his shoulder. I mean, it's clear that Israel needs the United States. And now we see these sort of anonymous officials being quoted with, frustration, which is diplomatic speak for furious. And at a very high stakes moment for both men. I mean, there's a terrible dilemma for Netanyahu and the war cabinet. They feel like, the military imperative is a diplomatic disaster. And for President Biden, he's following his moral imperative with kind of mixed implications.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm just reading here the US State Department saying that the US thinks a Rafah operation would weaken Israel's position in hostage talks and its standing in the world.
Right, because we're disagreeing on the end game and we're watching the blame game. Both sides are blaming the other for sabotaging the hostage talks. The timing of it is very complicated. On the Israeli side as well, these are called the Days of Awe, starting with Holocaust Memorial Day in Israel, leading up to the Military Memorial Day, where they, talk about fallen soldiers and sacrifices for the state, and then Independence Day. So it all ends to this kind of heated atmosphere. On top of that, we've got presidential politics. I mean, in the interview where President Biden said that he was going to consider withholding weapons, for offensive measures, the second before he was talking about the U.S. economy, shrinkflation, and the price of a Snickers chocolate bar.
You see, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, there is nuance in all this, and I guess the key will be the scale of this operation in Rafah and what exactly takes place.
Absolutely. In some ways, this could end up being a war of words, a little bit about semantics. If it's on the edges of Rafah, if it's not a major ground incursion, which is what the United States had laid down as their red line. I also heard from John Kirby, a White House spokesman, today saying that there are alternatives. I mean, everybody understands that Rafah is Sinwar's last stand. And it's not like the United States wants Hamas to go free either. They're designated terrorists, according to our government. It's just a matter of how you do it. That's what Secretary Blinken said in the very first days after October 7th. We support you, Israel. How you fight this matters. And President Biden is desperate for this kind of second chance opportunity to get it right in the Middle East. And he said it again the other night. He said, we made mistakes in Afghanistan, and we understand we wanted to get bin Laden. We can help you get Sinwar. It's very interesting because it's almost as if we're advocating for revenge rather than military retaliation. He's almost saying, like, keep it personal. Don't make it too big because the civilians suffer in the end.
Yeah. And I mean, what do you think is going through Netanyahu's mind in all this? Is he on the verge of completely ignoring what his main allies say? And is that because he sees his political future effectively tied up with prolonging this war? Is it as simple as that?
It's two things. I would say it is complicated. Yes, it's his military, it's his political survival, but he also does believe that Israel's survival depends on being strong. He ran a campaign saying, we will bring you peace through strength. What he delivered on October 7th was war through weakness. I think he's channeling Machiavelli, and he's saying, either treat your enemies generously or destroy them altogether, because they will seek revenge for slight injuries, and for large injuries they will not. I think he's going for, he's trying to please the West. He sleeps in the East, and it's a very, very difficult place for him to be. And where you stand often depends on where you sit. We sit in Washington, D.C. It's a 14-hour flight from Kabul. And the Israelis who were taken hostage on October 7th are a 14-minute walk from Gaza.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Would you bear with us, Laura, and stay with us, because Matthew Miller at the State Department has just been speaking, and we're just going to play a little of what he had to say.
They have made quite clear they intend to conduct an operation. The operation that they have conducted so far has been limited. They have talked, I think, quite openly about conducting a major military operation in Rafah. We are opposed to that, but we'll see what happens. We have made quite clear we don't want to see it happen. We continue, and I should say, we do continue to engage with them about other options that they can pursue. We have presented a full range of other policy choices that they can make that we think would achieve the goal of dismantling Hamas and choking off the Hamas battalions that remain in Rafah without further endangering civilians there and without causing this mass population displacement with no place for them to go. And so they may end up taking that option, but right now we will wait and see what happens.
Have you had any indication in conversations since?
Yeah, it's interesting, Laura, isn't it? So the Americans don't know what Netanyahu is going to decide. I mean, he's clearly going ahead with some sort of operation. Matthew Miller there saying they're opposed to a major operation, but as you were saying, they're also saying that there are lots of ways of doing it. They don't know what's going to happen.
Well, Netanyahu is famous for strategic dithering, and sometimes even he doesn't know what he's going to do until he has to. I mean, I think his policy for years has been, sit and do very little, hold the line. He very much channels Churchill, and I don't know, you folks in the UK will get this better than I do, but he sees himself as this kind of lone figure, and it doesn't matter what forces, whether America's with you or not. He's going to hold the line and fight the fight through the dark night.
Yeah, but the bottom line is that, they rely on America for a lot of military equipment.
Absolutely. And that's why when we had that kind of come to Jesus phone call several weeks ago after the disastrous strike on the World Central Kitchen aid workers, you saw that he was actually all of a sudden opened up multiple openings, multiple crossings for aid to get through to the civilians in Gaza. I mean, he is very much dependent on the United States, and he hates to acknowledge that. I mean, the worst thing for Netanyahu is to show weakness. His brother, who died rescuing hostages in Entebbe in 1976, Yoni Netanyahu, taught him how to street fight. And the first lesson that he taught his younger brother, Bibi, was he who delivers the first blow wins. Well, on October 7th, Hamas delivered the first blow. And ever since then, Netanyahu has been scrambling to play catch up. It's a very difficult position.
Yeah. OK. Well, listen, Laura, appreciate your time. And
thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate it. Right. Time now for some sport with Jasper.